Hey there, fellow language enthusiasts. Welcome to our podcast on the fascinating world of travel idioms. I'm thrilled to explore how these expressions have evolved alongside human mobility. Ready to hit the road, linguistically speaking?
Absolutely. It's amazing how our language reflects our journey through history. Let's start with one of the oldest travel idioms, all roads lead to Rome. This phrase isn't just a metaphor, it's rooted in the ancient Roman road system.
That's right. The Romans built over 250,000 miles of roads connecting their vast empire. The saying first appeared in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales in the late 14th century, but its origins go back much further.
Speaking of ancient influences, many medieval travel idioms were related to pilgrimage and trade routes. For example, on the straight and narrow originally referred to the narrow path pilgrims would follow to holy sites.
Fascinating. As we move forward in history, we see how technological advancements shaped our language. The Industrial Revolution and the rise of railways introduced new travel expressions. Off the rails is a great example of this.
Absolutely. And then came the age of automobiles, which gave us idioms like hit the road. This phrase likely originated from the literal action of vehicles making contact with the road at the start of a journey.
That makes sense. It's interesting how these idioms evolve. Take catch the red eye, for instance. This emerged in the 1960s 70s with the growth of commercial aviation, referring to overnight flights that left passengers with bloodshot eyes.
That's a vivid image. It's amazing how our language adapts to new forms of travel. By the way, did you know that the first official red-eye flight route in the United States was established in 1957?
I didn't. Tell me more about that.
It was an American airline service called the Mercury, flying from Los Angeles to New York. It departed at midnight and arrived at dawn, becoming incredibly popular with business travelers.
That's a great example of how travel innovations directly influence our language. It's not just about the technology itself, but how it changes our experiences and the way we think about travel.
Exactly. And it's not just about physical travel either. Some idioms reflect the psychological aspects of journeys. Take itchy feet, for example. It's been around since at least the 1940s and vividly describes the restless desire to travel.
That's such a relatable feeling. It's interesting how these expressions capture not just the act of travel, but the emotions and mindsets associated with it. Wanderlust is another great example of this.
Absolutely. Wanderlust is actually a loanword from German, combining wandern, to hike, and lust, desire. It became popular in English in the early 20th century as travel became more accessible.
That's fascinating about Wanderlust. It really captures that intense desire to explore. There's actually a scientific aspect to this feeling. In 2013, a study linked the DRD47, our gene variant, to curiosity and a greater tendency for exploration.
Wow, so wanderlust might be in our DNA? That's incredible. It certainly explains why some people seem to have an insatiable appetite for travel. Speaking of which, the idiom itchy feet perfectly describes that restless feeling, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it's not just English that has expressions for this feeling. In German, they use Fernweh, which literally translates to far sickness or longing for distant places. It's amazing how universal this sentiment is.
That's a great point. These idioms really do reflect our shared human experiences. Another psychological aspect of travel that's captured in our language is the idea of getting away from it all. This phrase became popular in the mid-20th century with the rise of vacation culture.
Right, and it's interesting how that concept actually transformed global tourism. In the post-World War II era, when workers started getting paid vacation time, places like Hawaii experienced huge tourism booms as people sought to escape their daily routines.
That's a perfect example of how these idioms aren't just colorful phrases, but reflections of broader societal changes. It reminds me of another travel-related expression, cabin fever. This term emerged among 19th century American settlers who spent long winters isolated in remote cabins.
And now it's a feeling we're all too familiar with, especially after the recent pandemic. It's interesting how these historical idioms can suddenly become so relevant again.
Absolutely. It just goes to show how enduring these expressions are. They evolve with us, but the core feelings they represent, the desire to explore, the need for escape, the restlessness of confinement, these are all part of the human experience.
Well said. And let's not forget about the transformative power of travel, captured in the saying, travel broadens the mind. This idea has ancient roots, but became especially popular during the 18th century Grand Tour era.
Yes, and it's more than just a saying. Mark Twain famously wrote about this in The Innocents Abroad, stating that travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow mindedness. Modern research has actually confirmed that multicultural experiences enhance creativity and cognitive flexibility.
That's really powerful. It shows how these idioms aren't just linguistic curiosities, but reflect deep truths about human nature and personal growth. They capture both the practical aspects of travel and its profound impact on our psyche.
Absolutely. From wanderlust to cabin fever, these expressions paint a vivid picture of our relationship with travel and exploration. They remind us that journeys aren't just about changing our physical location, but about transforming our perspectives and expanding our horizons.
Now that we've explored the psychological aspects of travel idioms, let's dive into some expressions that describe the practical experiences of traveling. One of the most common pieces of travel advice is to travel light. What's your take on this?
Travel light is such a practical idiom, isn't it? It's been around for centuries, originating from the simple fact that carrying less meant moving faster and more easily. This was crucial advice for traders and pilgrims covering long distances.
Absolutely. And in modern times, this idiom has taken on new meaning. In 2010, travel writer Rolf Potts took the concept to the extreme with his no baggage challenge. He traveled around the world for 6 weeks with absolutely no luggage.
That's incredible. Talk about the ultimate expression of traveling light. It really shows how these idioms can inspire real world experiments. Speaking of travel styles, what about the phrase live out of a suitcase?
Live out of a suitcase emerged in the mid 20th century with the rise of frequent business travel. It paints a vivid picture of someone who moves so often that they never fully unpack. The famous chef and travel host Anthony Bourdain had an interesting take on this lifestyle.
Oh, what did Bourdain say about it?
He once said, "The best thing is not the food or seeing old monuments. It's the disorientation, the valuable vertigo of travel." He transformed the often negative connotation of living out of a suitcase into something positive, a lifestyle that enables continuous discovery.
That's a fascinating perspective. It reminds me of another travel idiom that celebrates unconventional choices off the beaten track. This phrase gained significant momentum in the 1970s with the publication of the first Lonely Planet guidebook.
Yes, Across Asia on the Cheap, by Tony and Maureen Wheeler. It really changed how many people approach travel, didn't it? The Wheelers emphasized exploring destinations beyond typical tourist routes.
Exactly. And this philosophy ties in nicely with another idiom we haven't mentioned yet, the road less traveled. It comes from Robert Frost's famous poem, but it's taken on a life of its own in travel contexts.
That's right. It's often used to encourage unique travel experiences. But interestingly, literary scholars note that Frost's poem is actually more ambiguous than many people realize. The narrator admits the paths were really about the same.
That's a great point. It suggests that sometimes the road less traveled is meaningful, and sometimes it's just a different route to the same destination. Speaking of routes, what about the idiom fly by the seat of your pants?
Oh, that's a great one. It originated in early aviation, when pilots had to rely on instinct and physical feedback from the plane when instruments failed. It perfectly captures the idea of improvising while traveling.
Absolutely. And it gained mainstream popularity after Douglas Corrigan's famous wrong way flight from New York to Ireland in 1938. His apparent seat of the pants navigation became legendary.
Moving on to cultural reflections and travel idioms, let's explore how these expressions shape our attitudes towards exploration and global understanding. One of my favorites is "the world is your oyster." Or, what do you think about this Shakespearean phrase?
It's fascinating how Shakespeare's words from 1602 have taken on new significance in our age of budget airlines and digital nomadism. The phrase suggests that the world is full of opportunities, just waiting to be discovered.
Absolutely. In 2012, Airbnb even used "the world is your oyster" as a marketing campaign. It perfectly captured how technology was making global exploration more accessible than ever before.
That's a great example of how these old idioms can find new relevance. Speaking of choosing paths, what about the road less traveled? This phrase comes from Robert Frost's poem, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It's often interpreted as a celebration of individualism and choosing one's own path. However, there's an interesting scholarly debate about the poem's true meaning.
Oh? What do the scholars say?
Well, they point out that in the poem, the narrator admits the paths were really about the same. This suggests that we might romanticize our choices after the fact. It adds an intriguing layer to how we use this idiom in travel contexts.
That's a thought-provoking interpretation. It reminds me of another travel-related idiom, all roads lead to Rome. This one has a fascinating historical basis, doesn't it?
Indeed, it does. The saying refers to the ancient Roman road system, where roads throughout the empire literally did lead to Rome. The Romans built over 250,000 miles of roads connecting their vast territories.
That's incredible. And there was even a monument in Rome related to this, right?
Yes, the Millenarium Aureum, or Golden Milestone. It was erected by Emperor Augustus in the Roman Forum and considered the symbolic center of the empire. Distances to all Roman cities were measured from this point.
So it was literally true that all roads led to Rome. It's amazing how these idioms can encapsulate so much history. Let's shift gears a bit. What about bon voyage? It's not an English phrase originally, is it?
You're right, it's not. Bon voyage is a French expression that entered English in the late 18th century. It literally means good journey and became popular when French was considered the language of culture and sophistication.
Interesting. And I've heard that it had a special significance in the era of transatlantic ocean liners. Can you tell us more about that?
Certainly. During that time, formal bon voyage parties were held on board the night before departure. These were elaborate affairs attended by travelers and their guests. When guests disembarked before sailing, bon voyage was a sincere wish for safe passage on what was still a somewhat dangerous undertaking.
That really puts the phrase in context. It's more than just a casual farewell, isn't it? It carries the weight of history and the emotions of those embarking on significant journeys.
Absolutely. It's fascinating how these travel idioms have evolved over time. Speaking of evolution, let's look at how traditional travel idioms are adapting to modern contexts. For instance, how has digital technology impacted these expressions?
That's an interesting question. One great example is how the world is your oyster took on new meaning with the rise of Airbnb and remote work opportunities. Suddenly, this centuries-old phrase became more literal than ever before.
Exactly. And it's not just positive idioms that have found new relevance. Cabin fever became globally understood during the COVID-19 pandemic lockdowns. Ironically, this led to increased searches for actual cabin rentals as people sought safe isolation in different environments.
That's a perfect example of how global events can reshape our understanding of these phrases. It's also interesting to see how some idioms have adapted to new travel norms. Take break the journey, for instance.
Oh, yes, that phrase has quite a history. It originated in the 19th century with the introduction of break of journey tickets on British railways. How has it evolved in the modern context?
Well, it's now often used in the context of long-haul flights and multi-destination trips facilitated by budget airlines. The concept has shifted from a necessity of rail travel to a strategy for maximizing travel experiences.
That's fascinating. It shows how resilient these idioms can be adapting to new technologies and travel habits. Speaking of new technologies, do you think we'll see new travel idioms emerging from current trends like space tourism or virtual reality travel experiences?
That's an intriguing thought. We might start hearing phrases like out of this world experience being used more literally for space tourism, or perhaps virtual voyager for those who explore through VR.
And don't forget about eco-conscious travel movements. We might see more idioms related to green journeys or carbon-neutral adventures in the near future.
Absolutely. It's clear that as our travel habits evolve, so too will our language. These idioms not only reflect our experiences, but also shape how we conceptualize and approach the act of journeying.
Well said. As we've journeyed through the past, present, and potential future of travel idioms, we've seen how deeply intertwined language is with our experiences of movement and exploration.
Indeed. These expressions are more than just colorful language. They're a window into our collective relationship with travel and adventure. They capture the practical aspects, the emotional experiences, and the transformative power of journeys.
Absolutely. And as we look to the future, it's exciting to think about how new forms of travel and global experiences will shape our language. Who knows what idioms we'll be discussing in a decade or two?
That's a thrilling thought to end on. Thank you all for joining us on this linguistic journey through travel idioms. We hope it's inspired you to think differently about the language we use to describe our adventures.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the fascinating world of language and travel. Bon voyage, everyone!